Jake Morrison stood in the massive hall and looked up at the ceiling that seemed to stretch forever above his head. The Galactic Council chamber was built to make visitors feel small, and he knew it was working exactly as planned. Around him sat representatives from dozens of alien species in seats that rose like stairs toward the dark ceiling. Their eyes, or whatever they used to see, were all pointed at him. The human ambassador wore his best blue suit and kept his hands at his sides. He had been coming to this place for 12 years now, and each time he felt the same weight pressing down on his shoulders. Today felt different, though, because today the council was not asking for anything. They were telling Speaker Valder rose from the center seat. The Zeltharian was twice as tall as Jake and had 4 arms that moved like dancing snakes. His skin looked like gray stone, and his eyes were made of something that sparkled like broken glass. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber without any need for machines to make it louder. "Ambassador Morrison," Valder began, and his words echoed off the walls. "Humanity has been a member of this council for 12 of your years. In that time, your species has contributed certain useful innovations and problem-solving methods. However, the council has reached a decision regarding your future status." Jake felt his aide Lisa Grant tense beside him, but he kept his face blank and calm. Lisa was young and still believed that fairness mattered in places like this. Jake had learned better over the years. He nodded once to show he was listening. "The council requires that Earth surrender control of all military vessels to Zeltharian oversight within 90 standard days," Valder continued. "Your economic policies will be managed by Kravani trade specialists to ensure proper integration with galactic markets. Human colonies will accept council governors to guide local administration. Finally, humanity will relinquish voting rights on all major council decisions and accept permanent advisory status." The words hit Jake like physical blows, but he did not move or change his expression. Around the chamber, he could see other species watching his reaction. The insect-like Chamek clicked their mandibles in what might have been approval. The energy beings called Luminari pulsed brighter. The water-breathing delegates from the deep worlds said nothing, but their tentacles moved in patterns that Jake had learned meant agreement. "These terms are not negotiable," Valder added. "They reflect the Council's unanimous decision that humanity requires guidance to reach its full potential as a galactic citizen. Your aggressive tendencies and unpredictable nature have caused concern among the established members." Jake almost smiled at that. Aggressive tendencies. In 12 years, humanity had never started a fight or broken a treaty or failed to honor an agreement. Their crime was asking too many questions and suggesting different ways to solve problems. Their real crime was being new and small and not knowing their place. Furthermore, Valder continued while his 4 arms gestured in complex patterns, human research into quantum communication, networks, and atmospheric processing will be shared completely with Council science divisions. Your military tactics and training programs will be studied and standardized according to Council doctrine. All human exploration beyond your current territory will cease until proper supervision can be established. Lisa Grant made a small sound beside him, but Jake touched her arm gently to keep her quiet. He had expected this day for months. The signs had been building like storm clouds on the horizon. Trade agreements that suddenly became less favorable. Scientific exchanges that stopped, including human researchers. Military exercises, where human ships were assigned to watch instead of participate. The Council had decided that humanity was useful but dangerous. They wanted human innovations without human independence. They wanted human solutions without human questions. They wanted humanity to become pets that performed tricks on command. "The Council is generous in its patience," Valder said, and now his glass eyes focused directly on Jake. 72 standard hours will be provided for Earth to formally accept these terms. A response team will be dispatched to begin implementation immediately upon your agreement. Jake stood quietly for a long moment while the chamber waited. He could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. They expected him to argue or plead or make angry speeches about human rights and dignity. They expected drama and emotion and probably some kind of breakdown. Instead, Jake Morrison straightened his tie and cleared his throat. "The human government will need time to properly consider your proposal," he said, in the same tone he might use to order coffee. 72 hours should be sufficient for our review process." Vex Valder seemed surprised by the calm response. Several other delegates shifted in their seats or made sounds that might have been confusion. They had prepared for human anger, not human politeness. "Very well," Vex Valder finally said. "The Council will await your formal acceptance of these terms. This session is concluded." As Jake and Lisa walked toward the exit, Jake noticed something he had never seen before. The delegates were not celebrating or congratulating each other. They were watching him leave with expressions that looked almost worried. They had expected a fight and gotten a handshake. Somehow that seemed to disturb them more than any angry speech could have. Lisa waited until they were in the corridor. Before speaking, "Ambassador, what are we going to do?" Jake Morrison looked back at the chamber doors one last time. "We are going to do exactly what they asked, Lisa. We are going to consider their proposal very carefully." He smiled for the first time in hours. "Very carefully indeed." President Maria Santos sat at the head of the long table in the emergency meeting room, deep beneath the White House. The walls were thick enough to stop any listening devices, and the room had no windows to the outside world. Around the table sat the most important people in human space, including Admiral Ben Carter, who commanded the Earth Fleet, and General Susan Walsh, who ran planetary defense. Dr. Alan Brooks looked tired as he spread papers across the table. The chief science officer had been awake for 18 hours straight, running calculations and checking data. His coffee cup was empty, but his hands still shook slightly from too much caffeine. "The numbers are not good," Dr. Brooks said, without any introduction or pleasant conversation. "If the Council imposes trade sanctions, we lose access to rare minerals from the Kravani systems. Our manufacturing capacity drops by 30% within 6 months. If they block our research partnerships, we fall behind in quantum physics and bioengineering." Admiral Carter leaned forward in his chair. His uniform was perfectly pressed, even though he had flown directly from the Mars orbital shipyards. "What they want is surrender without calling it surrender. They want our fleet under their control and our colonies under their governors. That makes us slaves with better food." General Walsh nodded in agreement. Her short gray hair caught the light from the ceiling panels. "The military assessment is clear. We cannot fight the entire Council if they decide to use force. Their combined fleets outnumber ours 50-1. But we also cannot accept their terms and remain human." President Santos listened to each report without interrupting. She had been expecting this moment since the day humans first joined the Galactic Council. The honeymoon period was over, and now came the real test of whether humanity would keep its independence or become another client species. "There is a third option," she said quietly when the others finished speaking. "We leave." The room went silent. Dr. Brooks looked up from his papers with surprise on his face. Admiral Carter raised one eyebrow. General Walsh just nodded slowly, as if she had been thinking the same thing. "Complete withdrawal from the Council," President Santos continued. "We terminate all treaties and agreements. We recall our diplomats and close our trade offices. We consolidate our fleet around Earth and our existing colonies. We become an independent human nation again." Dr. Brooks cleared his throat nervously. "Madam President, the economic consequences would be severe. We would lose access to technologies that we do not yet fully understand. Our growth rate would slow significantly. But we would be free," Admiral Carter said. "Free to make our own decisions and our own mistakes. Free to explore space at our own pace and in our own way." President Santos stood up and walked to the wall display that showed a map of human space. 27 colonies spread across 15 star systems. 3 major shipyards. 6 research stations. Not much compared to the ancient empires of the galaxy, but it was theirs. "The question is not whether we can survive alone," she said while looking at the display. "The question is whether we can survive as ourselves if we stay. I think we all know the answer to that." General Walsh pulled up files on her tablet computer. Withdrawal would need to be coordinated carefully. We have civilians on council worlds and council representatives on our worlds, trade ships in transit, scientific exchanges in progress, military liaison officers embedded with alien fleets. How long would full withdrawal take? President Santos asked. 60 hours if we move fast, Admiral Carter replied. Our people are professionals. They know how to pack quickly and leave cleanly when necessary. Dr. Brooks was still shaking his head. We will be cut off from galactic civilization. Our children will grow up knowing less about the universe than we do. We will become a backwater species. President Santos turned back to the table. Or we will become something unique. Something that the galaxy has never seen before. A species that chose freedom over comfort and independence over security. She sat back down and looked each person in the eye. I am not going to order this decision. It has to be unanimous among the leadership. If anyone at this table believes we should accept the council terms, then we will find a way to make that work. Admiral Carter spoke first. I vote for withdrawal. Better to face the unknown as free humans than to face the future as council pets? General Walsh was next. Agreed. Military forces remain loyal to Earth, not to alien governors. Dr. Brooks was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed and nodded. I am scared of what we might lose, but I am more scared of what we might become. Withdrawal. President Santos felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Then it is decided. Admiral Carter, please begin immediate fleet consolidation. General Walsh, coordinate the recall of all civilian personnel. Dr. Brooks, secure our research data and terminate all scientific exchanges. Over the next 60 hours, human space became a whirlwind of quiet activity. Transport ships appeared at council worlds to collect human diplomats and their families. Trade vessels completed their current contracts and began the journey home. Scientific teams packed their equipment and abandoned research projects that had taken years to develop. Jake Morrison supervised the closure of the human embassy on Nexus Prime. He packed his personal items in a single bag and watched his staff carefully crate diplomatic files and communication equipment. The Zeltharian security forces watched everything but did not interfere on the final day. Jake Morrison requested one last meeting with the council. He stood in the same chamber where he had received the ultimatum and delivered humanity's response in the same calm voice he had used before. The human government has carefully considered the council's proposal, he said while looking directly at Speaker Thex Valder. We have decided to respectfully decline. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council and terminates all associated treaties and agreements. We thank the Council for the opportunities provided during our membership and wish you prosperity in your future endeavors. Thex Valder seemed shocked by the simple statement. Ambassador Morrison, this is clearly an emotional response to reasonable requirements. Perhaps additional time would allow for calmer consideration. Jake Morrison smiled politely. Our decision is final. Good day. As Jake walked out of the council chamber for the last time, he heard confused voices behind him speaking in a dozen different languages. They had expected anger or pleading or desperate negotiation. They had not expected humans to simply walk away. The last human transport ship left Nexus Prime 6 hours later. Jake Morrison sat by a window and watched the massive station grow smaller behind them. Lisa Grant sat beside him with tears in her eyes. Do you think we made the right choice? She asked. Jake continued watching the stars. Ask me in 10 years, Lisa. Ask me in 10 years. 1 year had passed since the last human ship left Nexus Prime, and Speaker Thex Valder was beginning to understand that he had made a serious mistake. He stood in his private office looking at reports that painted a picture he did not want to see. The galaxy was slowly falling apart without humans to hold it together. The first problems appeared in the outer Rim territories where pirates and raiders had been a constant threat for centuries. During their council membership, humans had developed new patrol patterns and response strategies that cut raider activity by 60%. The human ships were fast and unpredictable. They appeared where raiders did not expect them and used Tactics that no other species had thought to try. Now, with human patrols gone, the raiders were becoming bold again. They attacked trade convoys with growing confidence and escaped before Council forces could respond. The traditional Zeltharian approach was to send massive fleets to hunt down the attackers, but pirates simply scattered and regrouped elsewhere. It was like trying to catch smoke with their hands, Captain. Rex Morvan of the Zeltharian heavy cruiser Dominance had lost 3 convoys in the past month. Each time his ships arrived too late to do anything but count the wreckage. His tactical officer suggested spreading forces into smaller patrol groups, but Rex refused. That was human thinking, and humans were no longer part of the Council. Meanwhile, on agricultural worlds throughout Council space, crop yields were dropping. The humans had shared their farming techniques freely during their membership, but now those same worlds were discovering that they had never truly understood the principles behind the methods. They knew which seeds to plant and when to plant them, but they did not know why. On the colony world of Verdant Fields, the Kravani agricultural specialist Zethka watched his crops wither in the hot sun. The irrigation system had been designed by human engineers 5 years ago and worked perfectly until the seasonal rains changed pattern. Now water pooled in some areas while other sections turned to dust. Zeth-Dashka had the original plans, but they were written in human technical language that made little sense to Kravani minds. The humans thought in terms of adaptation and flexibility, while Kravani thought in terms of fixed procedures and exact measurements. Without human technicians to modify the system, it was failing completely. Similar problems appeared throughout Council space. Atmospheric processors on marginal worlds began producing air that met minimum standards but lacked the subtle chemical balances that humans had somehow learned to achieve. The difference was small but important. People could breathe, but they felt tired and sick after a few months. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked in her laboratory on the independent human colony of New Geneva, completely unaware that her former research partners were struggling with problems she could solve in minutes. Her quantum communication experiments had advanced far beyond anything she had shared with the Council. The breakthrough she was approaching would allow instant communication across galactic distances, but it remained locked in human space. The Council had copies of her early research, but they could not understand the intuitive leaps that led to her conclusions. Human scientists thought differently than any other species. They made connections that seemed random but somehow worked. They combined unrelated concepts in ways that produced unexpected results. On Nexus Prime, the first Sirius Council dispute in 3 centuries was tearing apart a trade agreement between the Luminari energy beings and the water-dwelling depths. The 2 species could not find common ground on territorial boundaries around a system that contained both energy-rich stars and water-bearing planets. For over 100 years, such disputes had been resolved by human mediators who somehow found solutions that satisfied everyone. Humans had a talent for seeing problems from multiple angles and creating compromises that seemed impossible until they explained them. Without human negotiators, the Council was discovering that their member species had very different ideas about fairness and justice. The Luminari believed in possession based on first discovery. The depths claimed rights based on biological need. Neither side would compromise, and the traditional Council approach was simply to impose a solution by majority vote. But majority votes created winners and losers remembered their defeats for centuries. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the human exploration fleet from her flagship, the UNZ Horizon, and received regular reports about Council difficulties from sympathetic contacts. She had served as a liaison officer with Zeltharian forces for 6 years and maintained friendships with several alien officers who now sent her unofficial messages. Commander Vex Tolar of the Zeltharian patrol fleet had fought beside human ships against raiders in the outer territories. His messages to Kate were carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. The Council was struggling with problems that humans had solved years ago, and pride was preventing them from asking for help. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the human research vessel Atlantis and monitored Council scientific communications from the edge of their space. Her former colleagues among the Shemek research swarm sent her data about their failing experiments. The insect-like aliens were brilliant at following procedures, but could not innovate when those procedures stopped working. The Council had always assumed that human contributions were useful but not essential. They believed that given time they could learn to think like humans or develop their own solutions to replace human methods. After 1 year, they were discovering that human thinking was not something that could be copied or replicated. Humans approached problems with a combination of logic and intuition that seemed natural to them but was completely foreign to other species. They asked questions that other species never thought to ask. They considered possibilities that other species dismissed as impossible. They combined information from different fields in ways that produced entirely new approaches. Most importantly, humans were willing to admit when they were wrong and try something completely different. Other species viewed changing methods as admitting failure. Humans viewed it as learning. That difference in attitude allowed humans to adapt and innovate while other species remained locked in traditional thinking. Speaker. Lex Valder reviewed the reports in his office and felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. The Council had existed for over 2,000 years and had solved countless problems through patience and overwhelming force. But the problems they faced now could not be solved by patience or force. They needed creativity and flexibility and willingness to try new approaches. They needed someone to ask different questions and suggest impossible solutions. They needed humans, but the humans were gone and they had left quietly without anger or threats or demands for apologies. They had simply walked away and closed the door behind them. Now the Council was discovering that the door could not be opened. From their side, the greatest military and economic powers in the galaxy were learning that some problems could not be solved with superior numbers or advanced technology. Some problems required a different way of thinking, and that way of thinking had left with the humans. Thex-VALDOR set down the reports and looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were building something new, while the Council struggled to maintain something old. He wondered for the first time which approach would prove more successful in the long run. 3 years after humanity disappeared from galactic politics, the first major economic crisis in 1,000 years struck the Kravani Federation like a collapsing star. Trade Minister Nex Volan stared at shipping reports that made no sense to his logical merchant mind and felt panic growing in his chest like a living thing. The numbers were impossible, but they were also undeniably real. Transport costs had increased by 40% over the past year. Shipping routes that had been profitable for centuries were losing money. Entire trade networks that had connected distant systems were breaking down because nobody could figure out how to make them work efficiently. During their Council membership, humans had quietly revolutionized galactic logistics with algorithms and scheduling systems that seemed simple but produced remarkable results. They had shared their methods freely, and Council worlds had implemented human innovations without truly understanding the principles behind them. Now those systems were failing and nobody knew how to fix them. The Kravani had always been the greatest traders in the galaxy. They understood profit and loss and market forces better than any other species. But human logistics were based on concepts that went beyond simple economics. Humans considered factors that Kravani dismissed as irrelevant, like crew morale and weather patterns and the psychological effects of long space journeys. Admiral Kate Sullivan received desperate messages from her former contacts throughout Council space. Captain Rex Morvan of the Zeltharian fleet sent coded transmissions describing military disasters caused by supply failures. Dr. Neth Quinn of the Shemek research swarms forwarded reports about scientific expeditions that had been abandoned when support ships failed to arrive on schedule. The humans had not just provided solutions to galactic problems. They had provided ways of thinking about problems that other species could not replicate, without humans to maintain and adapt their innovations. The galaxy was slowly grinding to a halt. The crisis reached its peak when disaster struck the Zeltharian Empire's primary shipbuilding facility at Forge Prime. The massive orbital complex employed over 2 million workers and produced the largest military vessels in the galaxy. It was also protected by safety systems that humans had designed during a technology exchange program 6 years earlier. Chief Engineer Devourer was speaker, Devaurer's younger brother, and he had always been proud of his practical approach to problem solving. When the cascade failure began in the primary fusion reactor, he followed emergency procedures exactly as they had been written. But the procedures assumed that human crisis management teams would be available to coordinate the response. Human emergency protocols were built around the concept of adaptive response. They provided general guidelines but expected human supervisors to modify them based on changing conditions. The Zeltharians implemented the procedures but could not adapt them when the situation evolved beyond the original parameters. What should have been a manageable reactor shutdown became a catastrophic explosion that destroyed 3 orbital platforms and killed thousands of workers. The disaster response was slow and confused because Zeltharian engineers kept waiting for orders while human training would have taught them to act on their own initiative. Captain Lisa Hayes monitored the emergency communications from her research ship Atlantis and felt sick as she listened to Zeltharian officers requesting guidance that would never come. She could have coordinated the evacuation in minutes, but she was in human space and the Zeltharians were too proud to ask for help. The economic shockwaves from the Forge Prime disaster spread throughout Council space. The facility had been the primary source of heavy industrial equipment for dozens of worlds. Its destruction created shortages that would take decades to replace using traditional Council manufacturing methods. Meanwhile, food shortages appeared on agricultural worlds as alien scientists discovered they had never understood the fundamental principles behind human farming innovations. They had copied human procedures but missed the deeper knowledge about soil chemistry and plant genetics that made those procedures work. Dr. Elena Rodriguez could have solved most of the agricultural problems with a few simple recommendations, but she was developing new quantum technologies on New Geneva and had no way of knowing that her former colleagues were facing starvation. The human colonies were thriving with improved versions of the technologies they had once shared freely. Captain Ryan Mitchell commanded human exploration fleets that were discovering new worlds, rich in resources and perfect for colonization. His ships used advanced sensors that combined human intuition with alien technology in ways that produced better results than either approach could achieve alone. But those innovations remained locked in human space. The Council made desperate attempts to reverse engineer human technologies but failed repeatedly. They had the end products but not the thought processes that created them. Human innovations were like poetry translated into mathematics. The words could be copied but the meaning was lost. Speaker Devourer called emergency sessions to address the growing crisis, but the Council had no solutions to offer. Traditional approaches that had worked for centuries were useless against problems that required human creativity and flexibility. The galaxy's greatest civilizations were discovering that their ancient wisdom was not enough. Secret meetings began among Council members as individual species considered private negotiations with human colonies. The Luminary energy beings were particularly interested in human quantum research. The depths had agricultural worlds that desperately needed human expertise. Even the proud Zeltharians quietly discussed the possibility of hiring human consultants, but humanity remained united in its independence. President Carlos Mendoza had replaced Maria Santos and maintained the policy of complete separation from Council affairs. Human colonies welcomed refugees and offered humanitarian aid but refused all requests for technological assistance or political cooperation. The humans had learned that their greatest strength was not their technology or their military power, but their way of thinking. That way of thinking had value precisely because it was rare and could not be copied or stolen. By walking away from the Council, they had made themselves indispensable. Trade routes that had connected civilizations for millennia were breaking down. Scientific research that had advanced steadily for centuries was stalled. Military forces that had maintained peace through overwhelming power were failing against problems that required intelligence rather than strength. The galactic economy was collapsing not because of war or natural disaster, but because the galaxy had lost its problem solvers. The Council had treated humans as useful but replaceable junior partners and now discovered that they were neither useful nor replaceable. They were essential. Commander Sarah Blake served as humanity's foreign affairs coordinator and received increasingly desperate messages from Council worlds. The requests were always carefully worded to avoid admitting weakness, but the meaning was clear. The galaxy needed human help and was willing to pay almost any price to get it, but the price humans demanded was simple and non-negotiable. Complete recognition of human independence and sovereignty. No more junior partnerships or guided development or alien oversight. The galaxy could deal with humanity as equals or not at all. As the crisis deepened, Council members began to realize that their ultimatum 3 years earlier had been the greatest strategic mistake in galactic history. They had demanded human submission and received human independence. Now they were learning the true cost of their arrogance. The humans had walked away quietly and left the galaxy to collapse under the weight of its own rigid thinking. 5 years after humanity left the Galactic Council, the first Devourer ships appeared at the edge of known space like dark omens of approaching doom. The alien vessels were unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They moved without engines that anyone could detect, and their hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most terrifying of all, they consumed entire worlds to fuel their expansion across the stars. Admiral Kex Molvar of the Zeltharian border fleet sent the first warning messages, but his reports seemed too incredible to believe. Entire star systems were going dark. Planets were being stripped of their atmospheres and crushed into raw materials. Billions of lives were ending in silence as the Devourers advanced through space, like a plague of mechanical locusts. The Council's response followed traditional military doctrine. They assembled massive fleets with overwhelming firepower and advanced to meet the threat with the confidence of civilizations that had never truly been challenged. The result was the greatest military disaster in galactic history. The Devourers did not fight like any known enemy. They appeared to learn from each engagement and adapted their tactics in real time. Council forces that had trained for centuries to fight each other were useless against an enemy that ignored established rules of warfare. Traditional battle formations were torn apart by weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Captain Rex Morvan watched his heavy cruiser dominance torn in half by forces he could not understand and felt terror for the first time in his long military career. The Devourer ships moved like living things and fought with a coordination that no organic species could match. They were not just aliens. They were something fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had produced. The Shimek hive worlds fell first because their rigid command structures could not adapt quickly enough to counter Devourer tactics. Entire swarms of insect warriors were consumed by weapons that converted living tissue into energy for the alien war machine. The highly organized Chemek society that had survived for millions of years collapsed in weeks. The depths dwellers tried to hide in their ocean worlds, but the Devourers had ways of reaching any environment. They drained entire planets of water and converted the liquid into fuel for their ships. Ancient underwater cities that had existed since before other species reached space were destroyed in hours. Even the energy-based luminari were not safe. The Devourers had weapons that could trap and consume pure energy, leaving empty space where once bright beings had danced among the stars. The Luminari, who had considered themselves beyond physical threats, learned that nothing was beyond the reach of the approaching darkness. Meanwhile, humanity thrived in their independent territories, completely unaware of the approaching threat. Their colonies had expanded to 32 worlds using improved technologies that combined human innovation with lessons learned from their council years. Captain Ryan Mitchell's exploration fleets were discovering new systems, rich in resources and perfect for human settlement. President Carlos Mendoza governed from New Washington, a thriving world that had become the capital of human space. The planet was a testament to human adaptability, with cities that incorporated alien architectural concepts modified by human creativity. Gardens grew plants from a dozen worlds, creating environments that no other species had imagined possible. Admiral Tom Parker commanded the combined human fleets from his flagship, the NZ Liberty, and received regular reports about expanding human territory and growing prosperity. The decision to leave the Council had proven correct in every way that mattered. Humanity was free and strong and confident about their future among the stars. Then the first desperate messages began arriving from the edges of Council space. They came through unofficial channels and were carefully worded to avoid admitting weakness, but their meaning was unmistakable. The galaxy was facing an existential threat and traditional responses were failing completely. Commander Sarah Blake received the most detailed reports through her network of contacts among moderate council members. The descriptions of Devourer capabilities read like science fiction, but the evidence was overwhelming. Entire civilizations were being consumed by an enemy that seemed to come from outside known reality. Dr. Elena Rodriguez analyzed the technical data about Devourer weapons and technology from her laboratory on New Geneva. Her quantum research had advanced far beyond anything shared with the Council, and she began to see patterns in the alien methodology that others missed. The Devourers were not just advanced. They were using principles that the galaxy had never encountered. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rodriguez realized that Devourer technology was based on quantum manipulation of matter at the subatomic level. They could literally reshape reality by altering the fundamental forces that held atoms together. No conventional weapon could affect them because they existed partially outside normal space-time, but human quantum research had reached the point where similar manipulations might be possible. The innovations that Dr. Rodriguez had developed in isolation could potentially counter Devourer technology. For the first time since the crisis began, humanity had something that the galaxy desperately needed. The formal request for assistance came through diplomatic channels that had not been used for 5 years. A council delegation led by Speaker Withdrawal himself arrived at the edge of human space and requested permission to enter. The proud Zeltharian who had delivered humanity's ultimatum was now reduced to begging for help. President Mendoza received the delegation in the council chambers of New Washington and listened to their desperate plea with the same calm expression that Jake Morrison had used years earlier. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The species that had demanded human submission was now asking for human salvation. "The Devourers will consume everything," Withdrawal said, and his forearms shook with emotion. "Our greatest fleets are destroyed. Our most advanced worlds are gone. Nothing we do can stop them. We need human help." President Mendoza considered the request carefully. Around the table sat Admiral Parker and Dr. Rodriguez and the other leaders of human space. The decision was theirs to make, and the consequences would affect both humanity and the galaxy. "We will help," President Mendoza finally said, "but not as council members or junior partners. We will help as an independent nation that chooses to act against a common threat. Our assistance comes with conditions." The conditions were simple but revolutionary. Complete recognition of human sovereignty. No interference in human internal affairs. Equal partnership in any post-war arrangements. The Council could accept human help as equals or watch the galaxy burn as slaves to their own pride. Withdrawal agreed without hesitation. Pride was a luxury that the dying could not afford. Within days, human fleets began moving toward the battle zones using tactics that no other species had developed. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded research vessels that analyzed Devourer technology in real time. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated multi-species task forces using human command methods that emphasized flexibility and adaptation. The results were immediate and dramatic. Human forces engaged the Devourers, using quantum-based weapons that could actually damage their reality-bending technology. More importantly, human tactics confused the enemy. Because they were based on unpredictability rather than rigid doctrine, the tide of war began to turn for the first time since the Devourers appeared. The galaxy was learning that some threats could only be countered by thinking in completely new ways. And humanity was the only species that had mastered the art of thinking differently. 2 years after human forces first engaged the Devourers, the last enemy stronghold, fell to a combined fleet led by Admiral Tom Parker aboard the UNS Liberty. The final battle took place in a system that had been completely consumed by the alien invaders and transformed into a massive processing facility. Human quantum weapons tore apart the reality-bending technology that had made the Devourers seem invincible, and their dark ships crumbled into ordinary matter that drifted harmlessly. Through space. The war was over, but the galaxy that emerged from the conflict was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before. The old Galactic Council lay in ruins both literally and politically. Entire species had been reduced to scattered survivors. Ancient trade routes were broken. Magnificent worlds had been stripped bare and would take centuries to recover. But something new was rising from the ashes of the old order. President Carlos Mendoza stood before the Assembly of Species, representatives in the rebuilt halls of New Geneva, and outlined his vision for the future. This was not a speech about human dominance or alien submission. It was an invitation to build something better than what had come before. The Commonwealth of Free Worlds welcomes any species that chooses cooperation over conquest, he said while looking out at delegates from dozens of different civilizations. We offer partnership, not patronage. We seek allies, not subjects. Every member world maintains complete autonomy over its internal affairs while contributing to our common defense and prosperity. The contrast with the old council system could not have been clearer. Instead of a hierarchy with ancient species ruling over younger ones, the Commonwealth was built on the principle of equal representation. Instead of rigid traditions that never changed, it embraced innovation and adaptation. Instead of demanding conformity, it celebrated the unique contributions that each species could offer. Jake Morrison had lived to see this moment, and he stood in the back of the assembly hall with tears in his eyes. The elderly former ambassador watched humans and aliens working together as true partners and knew that the quiet walk away from the council chamber 7 years earlier had been worth every sacrifice. Admiral Kate Sullivan oversaw the liberation of worlds that had been abandoned during the Devourer advance. Her fleets arrived not as conquerors but as liberators, bringing relief supplies and reconstruction teams. The humans did not claim these worlds as spoils of war. Instead, they helped them rebuild and offered them membership in the growing Commonwealth. The response was overwhelming. Species that had been ruled by the Council for centuries chose freedom in the Commonwealth instead. The Kravani merchant clans joined almost immediately when they discovered that Commonwealth trade policies were based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. The surviving Shemek swarms found that human flexibility complemented their organizational skills perfectly. Even portions of the proud Zeltharian Empire began breaking away to join the Commonwealth. Younger Zeltharians who had served alongside human forces during the war had learned to appreciate human methods and wanted to continue the partnership. Speaker Thex Valder found his empire fragmenting as more and more worlds chose human friendship over Zeltharian domination. The old council still existed, but as a shadow of its former self. Reduced to perhaps a dozen core worlds, it continued to function as a regional government but no longer claimed authority over galactic affairs. The age of ancient empires imposing their will on younger species was ending, and a new age of voluntary cooperation was beginning. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded research stations throughout Commonwealth space where human and alien scientists worked together on projects that neither could complete alone. The quantum communication networks that Dr. Elena Rodriguez had developed were being improved by luminary energy manipulation techniques. Atmospheric processors were becoming more efficient thanks to depth-dweller understanding of fluid dynamics. The innovations emerging from these partnerships were beyond anything that either humans or aliens had achieved separately. Human creativity combined with alien knowledge produced solutions to problems that had seemed impossible. The Commonwealth was becoming a center of technological and social advancement that attracted the best minds from across the galaxy. Trade flourished under Commonwealth policies that encouraged innovation and fair competition. Captain Ryan Mitchell's exploration fleets were discovering new worlds weekly, and every discovery was shared freely among member species. Instead of racing to claim territory, Commonwealth members cooperated to develop resources in ways that benefited everyone. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had become the Commonwealth's chief science advisor, and her quantum research was revolutionizing everything from space travel to medicine. Working with alien colleagues, she had discovered principles that no single species could have found alone. A combination of human intuition and alien logic was unlocking secrets of the universe at an unprecedented rate, but perhaps the most important change was in how conflicts were resolved. Instead of imposing solutions by force or majority vote, the Commonwealth used human mediation techniques to find compromises that satisfied all parties. Problems that had seemed impossible under the old system were being solved through creative thinking and willingness to try new approaches. Commander Sarah Blake had become the Commonwealth's foreign affairs coordinator and found herself dealing with a steady stream of requests from non-member worlds seeking to join the alliance. The Commonwealth was growing rapidly but carefully. Each new member was evaluated to ensure they shared the values of cooperation and mutual respect that made the system work. The transformation was not limited to politics and economics, art and culture were flowering as human creativity inspired alien artists and alien traditions influenced human expression. Music that combined human emotion with alien harmony was becoming popular throughout Commonwealth space. Architecture that blended human functionality with alien beauty was creating cities unlike anything seen before. Admiral Tom Parker coordinated the Commonwealth Defense Force from his headquarters on New Geneva and marveled at how different it was from traditional military organizations. Instead of rigid command structures based on species hierarchy, the CDF used human concepts of merit-based leadership and flexible tactics. Officers of any species could rise to positions of authority based on ability rather than birth. The Defense Force was also fundamentally different in its mission. Instead of maintaining order through fear and overwhelming power, it focused on protecting member worlds from external threats while respecting their sovereignty. The CDF intervened only when invited and withdrew as soon as threats were eliminated. President Mendoza stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched ships from dozens of species dock peacefully at the same ports. Kravani traders worked alongside human merchants. Zeltharian engineers collaborated with Shemek technicians. Luminary energy beings shared research with human quantum physicists. 7 years earlier, humanity had walked quietly away from the Galactic Council because they refused to surrender their independence. Now they were the center of a new galactic civilization based on the principles they had refused to abandon. Freedom and cooperation had proven more powerful than dominance and control. The galaxy had learned that strength came not from forcing others to submit but from inspiring them to cooperate. The Commonwealth was growing because it offered something that no previous galactic government had provided. It offered hope. Jake Morrison joined President Mendoza on the observation deck, and they watched the busy traffic of free commerce and voluntary cooperation. The old ambassador smiled as he remembered the day he had delivered humanity's ultimatum to the Council. "Do you think they understand now?" Jake asked while pointing toward the distant stars where the remnants of the old Council still struggled with ancient methods. President Mendoza nodded slowly. "Some of them do. The smart ones are already asking to join us. The others will learn eventually, or they will be left behind." The galaxy had discovered what humanity had always known. Sometimes the most powerful response to a threat was not to fight it, but to make it irrelevant by offering something better. The Commonwealth was that something better, and it was growing stronger every day.